Today, I will explain why I fabricated custom brackets for my deck and show how I went about fabricating them. So I'm constructing an internally framed deck at ground level. So my deck is barely above the piers or footings. I have a gap of about a ½ inch to an inch between each of the piers and the bottoms of my beams. So what I've discovered is I've not been able to figure out how to use commercially available connectors from a company such as Simpson to transition between my concrete piers and the bottoms of my beams. In particular, I'm trying to adjust for the X and Y position and then accommodate the varying space between each of my piers. So I decided to fabricate custom brackets using 2-inch by 3/16 inch angle iron. So what I did is, I cut, pre-drilled, and welded each bracket for each unique location, including a spacer that will support the load of whatever happens to be bolted to that bracket. Now this particular bracket hasn't been installed yet because it's going to support the end of a lone joist, which I haven't gotten to yet because that's part of the framing. So when I get to that framing step, then I can adjust, and the beauty of this technique is I can adjust the XY location and then get it all set up the way I want, and then drill and locate that wedge anchor. And as I mentioned, this piece of channel is my spacer that will actually support the end of that particular joist. And as you can see, I pre-drilled as a clearance hole for my hammer drill, and then 2 holes to include the carriage bolts in this case. Now I realize not everybody's a welder or has the equipment and skill to do so. It's something that I happen to have had an interest in, and it's a skill that I acquired years ago and acquired the equipment over time. And I can't claim that I'm an expert or I'm particularly good at it, but I get by. I do get by. So if you have an interest in welding or happen to own a welder and would like to practice your skill and are building an internally framed ground level deck, I submit this is an excellent time to improve your skill. Now I also had to fabricate a very custom and unique bracket. I have a single joist that I had to support between my front step and a window well. I literally had like 2 inches available. So I had no way to install a ledger board. So this bracket will actually be attached using a quick bolt through this hole here. It's just a piece of 1.5 1/8-inch angle. I welded some spacers on the back side to space it away from the foundation wall so that the lower part of this bracket is spaced away enough to clear the flange on my window well. I included a step that will actually support the bottom of the joist that gets installed, and I put in a couple of tabs that you can see here so that it'll just keep that joist from rotating. Now this particular bracket I painted because the upper part of this bracket will actually be exposed above the deck surface. In the remainder of this video, I will show how I went about fabricating the brackets and installing the beams. First, I need to measure the gaps between the tops of my foundations and the bottom of my beams so that I can add a step to each of my brackets that will support the beam at each of those locations. I'm starting to cut the steel for the brackets, and I have to cut 45-degree angles in order to make the L shape that I need. So to do that, I have to set the angle of the fence on my chop saw, and it's hard to get it exactly set to 45 degrees, so it's a bit of an iterative process. So to do that, I start off with a couple of lengths of my angle iron, cut to about the length that I need, and then I cut the first miters, which I'm actually referring to as basically my right hand miters. And to do that, I can just lay the angle iron, flat in the bed of my chop saw, tighten up the vise and go. But on my particular chop saw, the fence on the vise doesn't allow you to rotate it in both directions. So it's just a one-directional thing. So in order to cut the mirror of the miters that I need, I can't swivel that vise all the way around. So I have to actually flip the angle iron over and cut the top flange instead of the bottom flange like I do for the right-hand side. So in order to do that, I have to actually prop up the angle iron on a small piece of strap so that the top flange then clears the movable jaw of my vise. And then I slip a small piece of tubing between the movable part of my vise and the inside of the vertical flange so I can clamp that piece of angle iron into my chop saw, and then I can cut the top flange of that angle iron to give me the mirror miter that then will match up against the right miter that I had cut previously. Now that I have the fence on my chop saw set pretty accurately to 45 degrees, I'll go ahead and cut all the angles for all of my pieces out of a full stick of 2-inch angle iron. I'll cut both the left mirrored angles as well as the right mirrored angles as I go along. I'll mark the finished length before I cut, as well as whether it's a left-facing piece or a right-facing piece as I go. And I'll cut the pieces a little bit long, about a 1/2 inch or so. Once I have all my angles cut, I'll reset the fence on the chop saw to 90 degrees, and then I'll go back and I'll cut the opposite end off square. I use a handheld 4-inch right angle grinder to deburr all the freshly cut edges. Partly to keep myself from getting cut, but mainly to provide a nice clean edge for when I get ready to weld. I use my drill press to drill all of my holes. I use a 1/2 inch drill bit for the vertical flange of my brackets to accommodate 1/2 inch hardware. I want the hole in the beams and my brackets to fit pretty snug around my hardware, so I use a 1/2 inch drill bit rather than something larger. But for the horizontal flange of my brackets, I want to be able to drill directly through the hole that I drill with a hammer drill into my concrete footings and then drive a wedge anchor. But a test revealed that neither my 1/2 inch hammer drill bit nor a wedge anchor will actually fit through a 1/2 inch diameter hole, so I elected to use a 9/16 inch drill bit instead for the horizontal flange of my brackets. It's time to weld. My welding table is pretty ghetto, because I don't weld all that often, and I don't have the space to store a more proper welding table. Though my table is mostly just a sheet of plywood, I protect the area under my weld with a small sheet of 16 gauge steel. I do have water and a fire extinguisher handy in the unlikely event that I need them. The plywood itself is supported by a piece of bar grate, one of the pieces that I will use to fabricate my window well covers. I plan on covering that project in a future video, so consider subscribing to my channel if you would like to see me do that step. A well-used pair of sawhorses supports my bar grate. I'm using my trusty Dial-Arc 250, which I purchased used over 30 years ago. I'm still using a traditional welding helmet with a fixed lens. I just can't bring myself to purchasing an auto darkening helmet, given I already own a functioning helmet that works for me. Perhaps someday. A pair of vice grip clamps, a framing square, a chipping hammer, a leather welding jacket, and a pair of welding gloves rounds out my ensemble, plus a well-used pair of jeans. The takeaway here is you don't really need a whole lot in the way of equipment to do simple welding projects. I mean, you do need a functioning welder and decent protective equipment. And it's nice to have a table of some sort so you can work standing up. But in the past, I've been pretty successful actually welding directly on the concrete floor in my garage, and even out on the rock driveway that I have. But in this case, I really wanted to be able to stand up while welding, so I decided to just throw together what you see here. I'm using 332 6010 for my welding rod. I check for square as I go in an attempt to ensure my beams will end up plumb. For this project, I elected to use 3/16" angle iron rather than something thinner, simply so I could stick weld something a bit thicker for a change. Though I'm stick welding my brackets here, I will use MIG to weld most of the railings. Watch my channel for a future video on fabricating the railings using MIG. I grind the outside corners of each of my brackets so I have a nice flat surface when I bolt it up to the joists and to the top of my piers. I also grind one side so I have a nice flat surface so I can weld up an additional piece of steel that will act as a support on the bottom of the beams. And here are the finished welded brackets. So I have all my brackets placed, and I test fit to make sure everything was set up the way I had hoped. In some cases I have 1-inch angle. In the far end I didn't have as much space, so I actually used some slightly thinner material. And as you can see here, I have a kind of a special case. The piers in the center where arguably that's where it ought to be. So I have my support on one side, and then the plan is, we'll see how this goes, is to actually through bolt into another bracket. So I have two of those. I got one down here on the west end of my beam. As I mentioned before, I also have a bracket supporting the end of this one joist, and it just has a piece of 1/2-inch channel that's going to slip under like so. This bracket will support a doubled up joist here, and at the moment it appears that it'll sit flat right on the pier, and if not, I can put some thin shims underneath. As I showed before, I have two pieces of angle iron welded together, mitered. I have the holes drilled to secure to the rim joist in this case, and then I have two slightly larger holes, 9/16 actually, to secure the bracket down to the pier. Now I also added, in this case, a piece of 1-inch angle, which will actually slide under the rim joist in this case. That'll actually support the rim joist, with the idea being is that neither it nor the pier goes beyond the rim joist. So a couple advantages here is you won't see the pier at all. If we ever decide to come back and pour a driveway, I should be able to form this up and pour it reasonably close. And finally, I can extend the fascia down below the bottom of the rim joist without any issue. So that's the nature of all this. So the plan today is I will get these all set the way I need them, and of course I have to I have to set them so that they're between the joists, which I've previously marked. I'll drill the holes through the wood, and then I'll get everything plumb as far as the rim joist and the beam is concerned. I'll go along and I'll do all the brackets that way, and then I'll come back and I'll drill right through the hole that I previously provided. I will install the wedge anchor, and in a case where I have two, I'll only install one. And the reason for that is the plan will be then, once I got all the brackets placed, is to pull the end boards off that I have temporarily placed. We'll remove the rim joist and the beam. We're going to lay out landscape fabric across the dirt just to keep the weeds down. Then I'll come back and put the rim joist and the beam back in place. And then in the case where I actually have a second quick bolt, I'll go ahead and install that second bolt. I'm getting ready to install the bracket on the east end of the beam. In this case, I have a piece of 1-inch angle iron that's going to actually support the bottom here. So what I need to do is I need to make sure that I have clearance for the flange for this guy. I'm actually putting the cardboard, I think, on the form. Okay. Okay, that's about as close as I can be. Maybe just a skosh more on top here. Okay. Now I'm gonna get it level, or plumb I should say, since I can in this case. I'm gonna do two things. I'll make a mark along the edge for no apparent reason, just to have a visual, I think. And I'm gonna mark I'm gonna try to put a circle where I need to drill. I'm gonna take a nail and set the center, kind of like a pilot a bit. It looks pretty good. It's got to be pretty close if I want these things to fit. I'm using my trusty Milwaukee hole shooter with a 1/2-inch auger. So I'll get it started. I'm looking at it. It looks like it could stand to be this way a little bit. And I'm going to get started a little bit. Okay. Now I'm going to check for level to the extent that I can. And I'm eyeballing parallel with the temporary board. Here we go. And I just reamed it out a little bit to help me put that carriage bolt in. Get rid of the shavings. Set my bracket back in place. Grab one of my 4.5-inch long, 1/2-inch galvanized carriage bolts. It's pretty snug, which is the whole idea. I'll tap it in place and it should line right up. That's pretty good. Okay, now I got my bracket still pretty lined up. I'll take my marker again. I'll mark another hole. Pretty centered. I'll tap this guy out. Pull my bracket aside again. Attempt to mark the center. It'll help me get my auger started. You can see here. Yep. Before I actually drill the hole, once again I'll measure, try to get a reasonably level. parallel with the board next to my temporary board. Here we go. Ream that out as best I can. Clear out the chips. I'll get the first carriage bolt back in. I have a wrench here I can use to just screw that in a bit. That'll help draw it in a little. There it goes. Okay. Now I'll take the other carriage bolt. And I think it lined up pretty nice. Looked like it did. And again, I want to be careful. Oh yeah. It's hard to get these things perfectly aligned. Okay, but I'm spinning this in by hand, so that's a good sign. Now I can put the washers and nuts on. Now notice I left the bracket raw steel. Experience dictates with our climate and everything else, and given the gauge of the steel and whatnot, this stuff will rust over a little bit, but it's never gonna rust away. So I'm snipping this up pretty good. Now once I get the brackets attached to the concrete, I'll come back and I'll tighten these guys up some more. So here I'm installing the center bracket for the beam. So in this case, what I actually did is I actually have two pieces of angle iron. And the reason for that is I actually goofed. I accidentally welded this angle upside down, so I had to add another piece just to get a flat surface. So in this case, what I'm actually doing is I got one on either side. Now the one difference is that I did drill 9/16 inch holes on the backside. So the idea, I'm hoping, okay, that I'll be able to drill holes through this bracket, okay, and then actually line them up with the bracket on the other side. So this is going to be a challenge. So first of all, I'll just slip this guy underneath there. It's, you know, it fits pretty good. I just gotta relieve it a little. And actually, I can afford to slide this guy over like so. And I got a couple things I wanted to do here. Is I think I show it this way. As you can see, it's not quite vertical there. See, so it's going to be hard to make it vertical because it's fighting me, unless I slip a shim under there. Okay, but whatever I do on this side, I got to recreate on the other side. Okay, that's the plan. So once again, I take a marker, and I'm just going to mark the hole just like so. Okay, and it looks pretty centered. I'll pull this bracket out. Oops. Get the one on the other side out of my way. This has been working well for me, so I'll take a nail and I'll mark the center. To the extent that I can. Okay. Now the plan here today is I'm only going to drill halfway through. Okay. So I'm thinking about how I'm going to do this. So let me get started. Okay. And now I'm going to get this guy level. Okay. And since I got a speed square, I get it reasonably square. Okay. I think actually that's really important in this case. Pretty square. Okay. Halfway through. Okay. Okay, so I'm making this up as I go. So I'll put my bracket back on here. And I'll lift this up. So I'm going to go ahead and place a bolt in that hole. Now, strictly speaking, I don't need to do this. Okay. Okay, now my plan is take my speed square, try to mark it right there, okay. And then I'm going to go across. Okay, I could have held it this way so you could see what I'm doing. So make a mark like so. And then I'll do the same thing on this side. Now granted, it's going to be vertical. In theory, these guys are at the right height. So let me move the GoPro over to the other side. In theory, I should be able to drill out into this thing, okay? Let me mark that hole. I'm going to mark the center of this hole-ish. I'm going to come on this side, and I'm going to drill, try to get started, okay? And now I'm going to do the same thing I did before. I'm going to try to get this guy level. Okay, down, down, down. Oops. Start to bleed down, okay. And square. Okay. Try to go on a little bit. Okay. So now I'm going to go back to the other side and drill through for it. Okay. Now, with my bolt, which by the way is, this time it's a through bolt, I'm going to go ahead and thread that through. Tap it in now. There it is. Okay. So I should be able to put this guy on there. Oh, it's close. Maybe I have to lift it up. Just twist. I gotta twist this beam just to twist. See, that's just a tiny little bit. There it is. All right. That's pretty close. Okay, and I can let me just put a nut on that temporarily. Just to hold it snug. Okay, now I'm going to go back and double check square or lack thereof. You know, I'm way off. Okay, this side. Okay, that's really interesting. Okay, okay. Now I got this side almost perfectly square now. Right? Yeah. All right. So let me mark this side. The center. Okay. I'll come over here. I'll make this guy square. So I drilled the holes pretty close to even. Okay, it's not quite there yet. Okay. How's that? Yeah, that's pretty good. Okay, now I'll mark this hole. All right. I'll go ahead and mark this hole. Get the drill started. Okay. Now I'll get it level and square-ish. Okay, that looks pretty good. And drill it about an inch and a half. Alright. I'll move the GoPro back over this side. And I'll do the same thing here. Get my drill level. Get my drill square. There you go. I'll ream it out pretty good. Okay, blow out the chips. Okay, so here's going to be the moment of truth. Okay, put this bolt in. I can wiggle it in. Maybe I'll wiggle this one in. Yeah. Okay. I'll get it to it's coming out the other side. I could tap it, I guess. Okay. And now another bolt. I'll be optimistic and install a washer right away. Okay, screw it in. So I don't booger up the threads. Start. Okay, let's see here. Got my finger on the other side. I'm just waiting for it to just come out, okay? I'm going to move the GoPro to the other side. Alright. Now here's the trick. Alright. This guy. Okay. More or less lines up here. But I gotta raise the side of the beam just a little bit. Let's go and screw it in a bit more, okay? About the thickness of the steel. Okay. And then I'll lift this up just to get it on there, okay? And I'll screw it in a bit more. Okay, see how we did. Okay, now I'll do the same. Take a look at the bottom here. Okay, that guy looks low. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to jack this guy up. Remember, I got these holes are a little bit bigger on this side. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and see if I can't drive the lower one on. Nope, she's getting purchased. Here we go. Hot shit's. Okay, these bolts are longer. I think these maybe 5-inch bolts. Okay. Let's screw this other one in by hand. That's a good sign. So I'm going to install some washers. A couple of nuts. And I'm going to do it backwards just because of where I'm facing. I'm going to spin the bolt. So my plan for now is just to get them snug. And I'll honk down on them once I get everything attached to the concrete. So I'm getting ready to install the quick bolt in the west bracket on the rim joist. So I got my depth gauge set. Just got to put it in the center here, and I should be able to go for it. So here we go. I'm going to move aside some of that. I guess I can use a piece of lath here. Okay, and then I'm going to put the end on my compressed air hose. Blow it out a bit. Real slow and easy. You got a piece of tubing. Set it in the hole. Very gently, I'll blow it out. Start. And then blow it out again. Blow it out again. Okay. So I got my quick bolt. This is by Hilti. I got the nut on the end so I don't damage the threads. 12-ounce ball peen hammer. I like that tip. I could actually go a little deeper. Okay, and then I'll tighten these guys up after I get the landscape fabric installed. Ooh. Again. Well, that's about right. That's about right. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. Next, I need to remove the temporary boards that I had installed to secure the beam and the rim joist in place while I install the brackets and to keep everything square. So first I'll remove the east temporary board, followed by the west temporary board. And here's the finished result prior to adding the landscape fabric. We're getting close. The final step is to lay down landscape fabric. But first, we need to remove both of the beams, what I'm calling the rim joist and the center beam. Next, we lay out 2 lengths of landscape fabric that my wife actually took the time to sew together to make it one contiguous piece. After we temporarily tack down the landscape fabric, we replace the center beam and the rim joist. Although I didn't record it, the final step was actually to drill the second set of holes into my footers and install the second set of quick bolts.
Perfect. Okay.
And here they are with the first set of nuts actually installed. If you found this video useful, please give me a like below and comment either way. If you'd like to follow along with me as I complete my deck project, please consider subscribing to my channel. And if you do, you'll get to see me in the next video.